in a series. Sorry, that was a disturbance with a message. So good morning and welcome to this final installment in a series of 3 MSF Southern Africa and MSF Access campaign webinars on COVID-19 tools and local production. My name is Nima and I'm the editor of the Bekisisa Center for Health Journalism in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I'll be facilitating this webinar. The previous 2 webinars in this series focused on intellectual property rights and local production of treatments and vaccines. But today we're going to look at how to make the local production of diagnostic tools possible in Africa and what the challenges are that we would have to overcome to achieve that. And we'll also look at possible solutions. And as this webinar happens in the same week, this is that the World Health Organization announced the first licensing agreement for a COVID-19 antibody test, and in this case with the Spanish National Research Council. Now, this license agreement will make it possible for other countries to manufacture the test, and the Spanish National Research Council will share all the know-how with prospective licensees and also provide training. This process is also known as technology transfer, and it's something we've heard a lot about in these past months about COVID vaccines. And it's a process that large pharmaceutical companies have been reluctant to engage in. To discuss such issues in relation to diagnostic tools, we've got a great panel of speakers today to help us to understand this better. But before we go on to the discussion, just a few details about how today's webinar will work. So this webinar will be 1.5 hours long, and we'll start off with a short presentation by CapeBio, a South African company making diagnostic tools, including COVID-19 PCR tests. That presentation will be followed by a panel discussion of about 30 to 40 minutes with our 5 speakers, and then we'll move on to your questions for panelists. So if you'd like to ask a question, please do enter it into the chat box on your Zoom screen. I will try to incorporate as many of those questions, or if you have a comment also, into the discussion. So a little bit about our speakers before we start. In addition to CapeBio, we have speakers from the Africa Centers for Disease Control, the Diatropics Laboratory in Senegal, and also MSF, or Doctors Without Borders. We also have a speaker from South Africa's Department of Science and Innovation. Our speaker, however, is stuck in a meeting right now in our parliament about the new variant that was announced yesterday by scientists in South Africa. And she's hoping to get out of that discussion by 11:30. But she doesn't have much control over her time, so we're hoping for her to still join, but a little bit later than right now. So in the interest of time, I'm going to be introducing each speaker as they speak and not right now. And I'm going to start off the discussion by asking each of them an opening question, and then we'll move on to a bit of a discussion and then to your questions. So let's start at the beginning of the program, and that is with our opening presentation today. And our presenter is Daniel Nima, who is the director of CapeBio. Now, CapeBio is a South African biotechnology company manufacturing diagnostics reagents, enzymes, and kits. And as I've mentioned previously, they also produce COVID-19 PCR tests. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Mia. Let me just share my screen quickly. Thank you, Mia, once again, and to my fellow panelists, the Africans in the diaspora, and everyone else that is joining this presentation today. Good morning. As Mia said, I'm Daniel Nima, and I run a company that is based in South Africa that operates in the biotech industry. So really, this company, its key value proposition is to really, create innovations in Africa using African biological resources in order to, impact lives. And we hope to do that in Africa and beyond. And we're really looking at diagnostic tools as the first impact criteria for our innovation. Just trying to, yeah. So our research focus really, as I mentioned, is looking at African indigenous biological resources. So your biodiversity hotspots, microbial diversity. We're looking at both terrestrial and marine environments where we search for enzymes that are critical in diagnostic purposes. So this is your PCR related enzyme, but we also have other enzymes in our portfolio that are of great use or great importance in a life science industry. So what we do basically is to drive this innovation using AI, and this AI has really enabled us to be able to fish for very novel targets that are able to, compete or assist our assays to be, or kits to be competitive when you compare to those that are coming from your US, Europe, and China. So what we're trying to address here, this is a common problem in Africa where we have this, it's always the case that we've got this inadequate management of diseases like COVID-19 due to reliance on imports, as I mentioned. And we saw that during the first waves, Africa struggled to get these reagents into Africa so that they can manage the pandemic. Probably had we had our own testing capabilities, we would have managed the pandemic better. Associated with this, obviously, are the testing backlogs, and some of these backlogs are actually as a result of lack of finance, because imports are quite expensive and they take time to arrive in South Africa. And we have seen this especially in South Africa, where we've got a lot of criminal case backlogs. We've got a lot of backlogs when it comes to COVID-19. Even today, we still have other diseases that we neglected, such as HIV viral load testing during the ARV treatment management and so forth. So what this does is that we are now focusing on COVID test kit, and we have really neglected other diseases that are also creating health challenges in Africa. So really, we cannot really depend on these foreign resources for us to manage our health and ensure that we are able to respond to our healthcare challenges. And again, economically, there's this widening trade deficit between us and the foreign imports. Due to some of these foreign exchanges as well, because all we do is to import and use for our testing. As a result, we don't really create value and IP that enable us to be competitive in future pandemics. So our company really is striving to make sure that we play a critical role when it comes to diagnostic tools going forward. So the key component of these diagnostic kits is an enzyme called Taq DNA polymerase. It's very critical to say that this enzyme has been benchmarked with the very strong brands in the market globally that are coming from the US and Europe. And we have seen it, how it competes in a normal PCR setting, and we have used it for diagnostic platform development. The assay that we have developed has been registered by SAPRA, and we have now improved the assay to achieve higher accuracy levels and scores, because as a manufacturer, we keep on innovating and ensuring that we even introduce other value add propositions to our product. And we can see that this kit actually does discriminate between COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 virus and other viruses that are associated with it. So with less than 30% of South Africans vaccinated at the end of last month, we know that there will be a likelihood of a fourth wave. I think now Mia has said that we are seeing the other strain that is pushing the fourth wave in South Africa, and it's likely to be the case in Africa. This now creates a need for this local solution that we were tasked by our government to be ready for. And what we're trying to do basically for this product is that we're trying to open it up so that it can be used across all different platforms. And we're achieving this target that we are doing, and we will be doing all necessary measures to ensure that it is adopted throughout Africa across all different platforms. So in terms of capabilities that we have a very stringent process of manufacturing these products, because we follow the international standard organization criteria and guidelines, WHO, SAPRA, because it's almost similar to FDA and European mark. So this is the same quality, same standard, same workflow, and we're able to produce about 5 million tests a day. and we have potential to scale up even to do more. We include controls in our assays, and we continue to monitor the variants as and when they come. Yesterday, after the announcement, we started to play with our own models to check how our assay is, if our assay will be affected by the mutation, and we realize that it does not get affected. In fact, it does allow you to be able to distinguish between the new variant and the previous variants during the testing, because one of the targets does drop out. So we're trying to get oligos from different manufacturers so that we're able to open up this, these different platforms. The most important thing that I want to say here is that we are also helping a few SADC countries in terms of setting up laboratories for testing. And we have done that in 2 different countries successfully, where we have made sure that they've got about 3 to 4 hours turnaround in terms of getting results. And we're ensuring that they reduce cost and they have a sufficient supply of these reagents. So we are looking forward to introducing the same solutions throughout the continent, and hopefully we'll get partners that will allow us to be able to share this important task of ensuring that we improve quality of life in Africa and beyond. So we are also looking at expanding the repertoire of diagnostic kits, because we have built this platform. We are also looking at DNA-based viruses and RNA-based viruses, and we're hoping that in the next year we'll be launching quite a lot of diagnostic test kits that are targeting diseases that are prone to Africa. And we're also looking at variants panel detection that we're going to launch in the new year. So what we also are doing is to make sure that we have a lab-on-chip point-of-care diagnostic kits, and we have started with this project where we integrate this long workflow that is highly costly, especially for African conditions, where you find that most of the countries do not really have these machines or a budget thereof. What we are trying to do is to create something that can fit within the palm of the hand, so that we can detect different diseases in your palm of the hand using the mobile cell phone as a software analysis tool. So one of the target has already been in a process, and we'll be making necessary announcements once we complete that process. So we're hoping to expedite this process of innovating and introducing technologies that are relevant to African conditions. This is just the team that that is leading the company, but there's more other people that are not included here. I just copied the screen, and also these are some of our board members. It's not everyone, and I just took the screen from our website, and we'll be introducing more and more team members, including other partners in the next couple of weeks. These are our partners in the US, Canada, India. We have partners in Europe, for both commercialization of our products in those territories, but also for research and development support, because we exchange quite a lot of material. We have investors, local investors that are supporting us. Department of Science Innovation has been very supportive. I'm happy that Claudina will be joining us later on. CapeBio is our biggest stakeholder. We also have research and development partners locally. CSR is one of them, and CSR is our partner for the development of the COVID-19 test kit that we have developed and licensed through SAPRA. Thank you. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for your insights, Daniel, and for sharing what you guys are doing in South Africa. I'm sure it's something that we're going to get further in this discussion today. So we're going to move on to Dr. Yenu Kebede-Tebeje, who is a laboratory systems and network head at Africa Centers for Disease Control. He's a medical microbiologist and public health expert who leads initiatives by the Africa CDC and its partners to advance the use of laboratory diagnostics for health security in Africa. We've heard examples from South Africa now, but what about elsewhere on the continent? Do you know of other examples of successful local manufacturers of COVID-19 tests or other COVID-19 related technologies?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, for that kind introduction. So one opportunity that COVID brought to us is that there has been really a revolution in terms of research and development on manufacturing of diagnostics. I think we need to use this opportunity very, very effectively. You remember initially, most countries have put temporary export restriction on COVID products, including diagnostics. So even if you have money to buy, so it was very difficult for the African countries to get test kits. So as Africa CDC, we have been really promoting local manufacturing. In fact, we started long before COVID with our initiative called the Africa Collaborative to Advance Diagnostics. So there are some very good examples. For example, Morocco has been manufacturing PCR detection kit, and they were, in fact, using that test kit widely, and they have made now available even for commercial marketing. And then we will hear from Senegal. Senegal has been a pioneer in coming up with manufacturing of rapid diagnostic test kits immediately for COVID. Initially antibody-based, now they are manufacturing antigen-based testing. And there was an attempt in Nigeria where they were collaborating with Sheffield University in UK, and they manufactured a PCR extraction kit for SARS-CoV-2. And then here in Addis, Ethiopia collaborated with BGI in China, and they set up a manufacturing facility in Addis Ababa for PCR detection kit, and that improved testing situation in Ethiopia. So I know there are also some activities going on in Kenya, in Ghana. So everybody has tried something. So I think this was the opportunity really that changes the way we look at access to diagnostics. So let me stop there, and I can add more if there are additional questions coming up. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. We can certainly return to this in a bit. I'm first going to move on now to our next speaker, who is Sheikh Jane, who leads the Diatropics Laboratory, a social venture founded by the Institut Pasteur in Dakar in Senegal and foundations in France and Switzerland. Diatropics focuses on the local manufacturing of rapid diagnostic tests for neglected and epidemic diseases in Africa. So, Sheikh, since the epidemic started, we haven't heard so many positive examples about tech transfers because pharmaceutical companies are so reluctant to engage in this when it comes to local transferring of skills. Now, in Senegal, your company specifically has partnered with the United Kingdom and also with French companies to do some of this. Can you elaborate on those transfers that you've engaged in, and what have been the challenges with that? And if you look at the future, what would the next steps be? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mia, for the nice introduction. So I think I would start by saying, so Diatropics has 4 founding members, which are the Institut Pasteur de Dakar, the FIND, also the Institut de Recherche and Development in France, and the Maria Foundation. So Diatropics has been, the initiative started in 2018, before the pandemic. It started with a discussion with bioMérieux because they were stopping their RDT activities. So they were willing to transfer all their know-how to Diatropics. And we started the construction of the facility on September 2019. Couple of months before the COVID-19 pandemic. I would say we were very lucky. And when the pandemic hit us, so we were ready to start the manufacturing to around June 2020. Actually, so Diatropics only operate through technology transfer. We have 3 additional partners, which are Mologic in the UK, bioMérieux in France, but now BioNot with the support of the ACTE initiative. So we are manufacturing, as I said earlier, COVID-19 antibody test kit and also the COVID-19 antigen. In terms of challenges, I would say the most challenging part is really securing high quality collaboration with the international partners. Because, as you already said, some companies may not be willing to transfer 100% of their know-how. And with the strong advocacy team, like MSF, like FIND, ERD. So this dream became a reality. Africa CDC and West African Health Organization also has supported a lot. So actually first what we did, we transferred only 50% of the manufacturing capacity, meaning we were receiving semi-finished products and we started with the assembly. That's the easiest part. That way the companies that are doing the technology transfer doesn't have to compromise a lot on their know-how. This is how we started. And then we included the upstream manufacturing capacity. This requires really highly trained skills, highly skilled personnel, because this is a very critical part of the manufacturing processes. So what we did, we have been trained at the company site in France and in the UK. I think this has been key really to success for Diatropics, because by doing the transfer there, we were able to transfer also the documentation related to the quality management system here at Diatropics. So this is how things have been done. It was quite, I wouldn't say easy, but very straightforward, because the COVID-19 accelerated things. We knew that we had to be very ready for Africa to supply COVID-19 tests, and the companies who have been very, very, very supportive. Also, another challenge we have faced is things related shipment, because the supply chain was very broken. Even if the companies was very supportive in transferring their know-how and buying equipment for us, we were funding coming from other parts. It was very difficult to get some reagents because Africa has not been prioritized. And that led to a limited manufacturing capacity in the early months of the pandemic. So to do that, we have engaged with some local manufacturers on some key raw materials. Since 3 months now, things started to be easier for us in terms of supplying procurement of reagents from the UK and also from the United States.
Thanks very much for that, Seg. Just a quick follow-up question. I know you've touched on it a little bit, but just to break it down for us so that we're clear, when you say high quality collaboration, what are the components of that? What does it mean if it's a high quality collaboration when it comes to technology transfer?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I would say first is whether we are talking about licensing or not. If we take the example of the ACTE initiative, we are talking about licensing. So both parties need to be fully engaged. We need transparency. We also need to know what is the limitation of the background and what are the responsibilities. So I think these have to be very clear in the early beginning to ease the transfer process. Also, you need sometimes a backup from the company that are doing the technology transfer in terms of root cause analysis when the test is not giving, I would say, the good sensitivity or the good performance you want in the field. Because those companies doing the technology transfer sometimes have a better understanding of how the test should work in a different context, because we are here talking about very big companies. I would say so. This is the case: contracts, responsibilities, and transparency.
Thanks very much for sharing that, Seg. We're going to move on to Stijn de Boegrave now, who is the Diagnostics Advisor for MSF's Access Campaign. He works with the MSF movement, global health actors, civil society and governments to improve access to essential diagnostics for low resource settings. Stijn, I want to ask you about MSF's research in this regard, but before we get to that, perhaps a follow-up question from Seg's presentation. So if we look at this latest agreement with the Spanish National Research Council for a licensing agreement for antibody tests, do you think that qualifies as a high collaboration agreement in the sense that Seg described it now? Is there something more that can be done about it, or is it sufficient? Is it what we really want to see?
Thank you, Mia. Thank you a lot for the question, and also thanks a lot for the participants to join this webinar. So it's an exciting week, right? So we have the first open license for a technology to WHO CTAP. It's an ELISA test. So just to give you a bit of the background, that's a test mainly for purpose of surveillance. So it can differentiate, for instance, between vaccinated people and natural infections. So to measure interventions and to measure cases in a population, it's a valuable technology. So it's the very first open license to WHO CTAP and the medicines patent pool. So it's very exciting. Of course, it shouldn't stop there. And so the most difficult part, I would say, is still to come. So really making sure that there is a technology transfer, that this license is taken up by local manufacturers, but also that the full package, as Sher mentioned, it should be a full package of technology transfer. So including sharing all the know-how, all the data, but also making sure that next to the technology, there is also transfer of skills, training, and also support to go, for instance, from a prototype to scale up, to full scale up, which is a very difficult process. Also support in the regulatory processes. So that would be my advice, to really push for the full package of technology transfer, including all the steps that are required for to build the end product, but also to ensure successful supply in the region. But definitely an important step, this open licensing.
So Stijn, just for participants who may not be that familiar with technology transfer, if you're talking about the full package here, what time frame are we talking about? How long is it going to take before a company in Africa can start to produce this antibody test?
That's a good question, and it really depends on the technology, but also it depends on both partners, right? What is the capacity locally, but also what is the commitment from the provider of the license to also support actively the full package of technology transfer. And perhaps Sher can explain better about the timing he has seen for the transfers to Diatropics in Senegal, and perhaps also some advice how that can be in the shortest time possible, of course. Just wanted to also add into the discussion, I mean, technology transfer is important, and especially in epidemics where we really have to get the tests really quickly. But governments and funders should also look into local innovation, right? As CapeBio presented, and also at Diatropics, really next to technology transfers, also looking to local innovations that the know-how is generated in the countries, and we shouldn't be only dependent on technology transfers, I think. But it's an important and very complementary, I think.
Thanks, Stijn. I'm going to ask Stijn in a bit about how long the technology transfers took. But before we get there, maybe you can just tell us first a little bit about policy recommendations of MSF, because you guys looked into what challenges we need to overcome and how we need to address these type of things in countries with limited capacity. So as one of the contributors of that paper, please can you tell us what were your main recommendations so that we can build a discussion around, is it possible to apply these recommendations in countries in Africa?
Yeah, thank you, Mia. Happy to do that. I think that in the chat, there is already the link to our report. So that was reported and published during the summer. And this webinar is basically one of the next steps to start up and trigger the regional discussions and see which actors should do what to improve sustainability and local production. So in the brief, as you will see it when you go through. And so there is basically, this is based first of all on a big survey. Yeah? So we did interviews and bench reading of, I think, more than 60 to 70 actors, including local manufacturers. Diatropics was included, also CapeBio, African CDC as well. Anyway, all the big actors or the needed actors that should support local production. So, and then we analyzed the data and drafted key recommendations, what we saw as priorities to tackle. And it was organized, or it's organized in 4 buckets basically of recommendations, and the first one is really ensuring local demand and local procurement, right? So we have seen during the interviews that many countries, although there could be or there are reliable diagnostics tests produced locally, often they look only to import it. So it's imported cases because of the trust. They think, okay, US or European-based production is better, which shouldn't be the case. I mean, or they look only to the cheapest ones. And we know, like, local production, often lower volume, of course, they cannot compete with big suppliers from China or from the States. So it's really important to look into local demand creation, and pool procurement, for instance, can be a system. And so we have the African Medical Supply Portal, for instance. Perhaps can explain more about that, where you have pool procurement in the region to support also this demand creation. The next bucket of recommendations was about, really looking into the local context, right? And looking into what is needed locally in the country and in the region, and go for local game changers, not go to the same diseases that is already flooded with tests in the market, but really look to what is needed locally, where are the access gaps locally, and focus on those. And these could be low volume diseases like neglected tropical diseases, and I know Diatropics is looking into those. So I think that's the strategy we also support. And a third bucket of recommendations is about regulatory. Quality assurance is really key, also to build a local trust. So many countries, many donors look to quality assured products. So to really invest in strengthening national regulatory authorities and also the regional ones, that donors or governments don't only have to look to WHO pre-qualification or FDA, but also to regional, local, national authorization. So we do have much hope now also for the African context on the African Medicines Agency. So that's like a new regulatory body that now has been finalized, I think in early November, by enough countries to kick off. So they also cover diagnostics next to medicines. So that's perhaps, if we have the time later in discussion, perhaps Yenu or Sher or any other ones who have more information on the next steps for that. That would be interesting, I think. And then a fourth recommendation, which we already discussed, is about open licensing, right? So developers, and especially those who receive public money to do the development, we ask them to share their technology, their know-how with the public, so that local manufacturers can use the system. And you have WHO CTAP. We also have the TRIPS waiver proposal, which is a complementary system. So that's a bit in a nutshell, Mia, what we drafted in this brief. But happy to answer any questions afterwards, or even after the webinar. Feel free to reach out to MSF in case any questions.
Thanks very much, Stijn. I want to follow up with Sech on that question about how long does technology transfer take? So if you look at the products that you've been involved in, I know it's different for different projects, but can you just give us an idea of which aspects of the technology transfer takes longer? You know, does it take very long to negotiate with a company, or where do all the delays come in? And give us an idea of, you know, how long the transfer for different projects took.
Great. Yeah, is that possible to share a slide?
Yes, you can share your screen. I'm sure our technical team can make that possible.
Great. I think it's possible here. Can you all see it?
Yes, I can see it.
So first, I would say that the first key in speeding up the technology transfer is the engagement of the commitment from the companies, the provider of the know-how. Here at Diatropics, we have been very lucky with engaging with partners that really were keen to increase access to diagnostics here in Africa. So the negotiation was not something complicated for us. So this graph in this slide, I'm showing how fast things have been done here at Diatropics. So the construction started on September 2019. And on April 2020, 7 months later, we started the operations. The operation, so on June 2020, we had the first prototype of COVID-19 antibody. So we were in our office on March 2020 at Diatropics, and meaning 6 months later, the first COVID-19 antibody test was manufactured at Diatropics. This has been possible for different reasons. The first one was the training. The team has been trained in Mologic to manufacture according to their processes and according also to their quality management system. So what we did at Diatropics is we buy the same equipment than the ones that are in our at the companies doing the technology transfer. So this really is manufacturing processes because there is nothing new. If the team has been trained to do A, we will do A here at Diatropics. So this is the key. The second one is really the quality management system. On November 2020, we have been certified ISO 13485 by the British Standard Institutions. So this gives confidence to their and ensure that the tests developed at the manufacturer at Diatropics are of high quality because they are done according to the high standards for medical devices. So yeah, so to give you a summary in how long the technology transfer took, it was 6 months for Diatropics. So that was very quite fast because the team was committed and the partners were also very, very committed. The rest of the graph here shows you how Diatropics has expanded. So we, on March 2021, we have several members here that were that was financially and supporting us, but also doing a lot of advocacy for us. On July 2021, Senegal got the market authorization for the COVID-19 antigen test. And on October 2020, we got the regional EUL for the COVID-19 antigen test in the ECOWAS region. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. This was a really great explanation, especially with this slide. What is amazing to me is that this process is a long process. It took 2 years from beginning to end. So it's not as if when you start with a technology transfer process that you necessarily would be able to do, it's not going to be 3 months later that you have the project. That we need to understand it's a really long and a complex process. I wonder that Stein has touched on regulatory processes. Now, for me as a journalist, that's often very hard to understand because it's not just about producing the product, it's about getting it registered and approved so that it's of a sufficient standard. And Stein, you did address or touch on an African Medicines Agency that's going to be created or has been ratified by enough countries now, and that can help to speed up processes. But I wonder if we can hear from the Africa CDC, from our speaker, about what exactly, if you can break it down for us in really easy terms, why would a regulatory body like on the continent like this help us? And what exactly would it do? Why can't each country not just do this? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mia. One important challenge in the uptake of diagnostics is the requirement in each country for evaluation. The company has done the evaluation. We know the data is available, but still, if you go to countries, they want to register it after looking into how the test is performed locally in each country. So, which means that companies have to face a challenge that they have to do repetitive evaluation in each country. So the regulatory authority, like the African Medicines Agency, will help countries to standardize the requirement. For example, if we have data from independent evaluation from a certain country, so we can recommend that other countries should take that for granted and then register this product. With that, I think the uptake of diagnosis gets facilitated. And the other thing is, we as Africa CDC, we are also we have established centers of excellence. Actually, we have 7 centers of excellence, and then we can guide companies to do the evaluation in any of these, either in all of those or in any of these. And then, once the data comes out from those centers of excellence, then we recommend that, that should be taken as an evidence for each country, to register this product. So the African Medicines Agency, I think it's a welcoming development. It will be, a huge impact in terms of harmonizing the regulatory processes. Currently, we are trying to fill the gap through the the Africa Union, NEPAD. We have, the African Medical Device Forum. They try to really, bring countries together, harmonize standards required, and so on. But now with this, regulatory authority coming in, I think we will see lots of change in the next couple of years. So as Africa CDC, we will be working closely with the new agency to make sure that diagnostics are also included in their work plan, because there is a huge need, really, standardizing the requirement for diagnostics. So that's one. The other thing is, countries usually focus on WHO emergency use listing as a requirement, but we have indicated other criteria. Because some companies may not need to go for WHO emergency use listing because there is no reason for them to go to that process. So, so that's why as Africa CDC, we have recommend, for example, if you have, for example, any regulatory authority approval, including FDA in US. It could be also companies coming up with performance characteristics of a test kit. From independent organizations like FIND or others, I think that should be okay for African countries to register that test kit. So those are additional criteria to ease the registration process in member states. Thank you.
Thank you, Yunu. Just a quick reminder that if you have questions or would like to make a comment, please do enter that in the chat box on your Zoom screen. And also, just to give you a quick update, we have not yet heard from Claudina Lewitz. She's still in Parliament, but as soon as she joins, we will ask her to make a few comments as well. I want to move on to Daniel. Daniel, so Yunu has now explained to us how does the regulatory process works and how would an agency in Africa help us. You in your company, when you had to get your product registered, how did that translate for you in South Africa? What did you have to do with our regulatory body, SAPRA? And if you wanted to export your product to other African countries, what is it that you're going to have to do? And what is the time frame we're looking at?
Mia, thanks for that question again. I think I totally agree with what Yenwe is saying about standardizing regulation in Africa. It's going to go a long way for manufacturers like ourselves to be able to access and bring about the impact that we seek. But also, doing exactly what Sheikh was saying earlier on about, high quality collaboration and tech transfer, because we are capable of doing that as a company. And we get restrictions, from doing so because some of the African countries don't really recognize our regulator, right? Our regulator only recognize, or at least follow the criteria from WHO, European Union, FDA, the Chinese regulator. I think there's a fifth one, and it's probably, in the top 6 in the world in terms of the ranking of the standards. So, I mean, putting WHO obviously in the mix because WHO is a global body. What we've been struggling with is understanding of registering products as a local manufacturer versus registering product as an importer. Because, like I said earlier on, that we are net importers of all these tools. So, if the industry is not really booming, the regulators wouldn't necessarily know what to trial and how to pass, a product that is locally manufactured, because they've never done that before. So we had to basically be patient enough for them to direct us as to what we need to do. First of all, to use the reference laboratory that they use for all products that are coming into South Africa before they get approval. Even then, you find that the reference lab, they are used to having products that are coming from overseas, which come in different formats compared to the products that are coming out of, Pretoria, to Johannesburg, for instance. That's a short distance. So So that took a bit of time, but in the process, we learned quite a lot. I think both the regulator and ourselves, we had to learn, because at the end of the day, the regulator is a regulator. They're not, biased whatsoever. We have to play our part. But I think after this learning, we're starting to see more and more manufacturers wanting to also, ride on the same learning curve that we had. But the most important thing for us is really to be able to export our products to the rest of the continent without any restriction. You get to, a country, like Malawi, that to say we only want WHO approved products, because that's the criteria, that's the government policy, right? The WHO criteria or the approval is the same as FDA, is the same as SAPRA, which is our local regulator, is the same as European. So there's no difference. I think there also have to be the clarity of these standards, because at the end of the day, we're detecting the same virus. There is no different viruses. Therefore, a regulator that passes the product, it means that that product meets the international criteria. So I totally endorse what Yunus is saying. I think Africa CDC is on the right track to ensure that one single regulator can ensure that our products are able to be distributed throughout the continent, other than relying on a local regulator alone. But I do believe that even local regulators have a role to play in that regard, because we cannot isolate them, because they are on the ground closer to where all the events are happening in terms of the products. So they have to still maintain, because each country has its own laws and regulations. Therefore, local regulators must be there, but the global body, the continental body has to be recognized, and everyone has to adopt that. And I think we will take it as an industry. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Daniel. I would like to ask Stijn one more question before we move on to comments from participants. So Stijn, MSF has been so involved in negotiating for affordable prices of tests or diagnostics. Now, what are the challenges when it comes to local production? I've often heard activists say that if we produce tests or tools locally, that it isn't necessarily always cheaper than importing some of those products. So how would diagnostics translate to on the ground in Africa? If we produce them locally, would they be more affordable?
Yeah, not always. So the main driver of the price of a test is actually the volumes you produce. The more volumes you produce, the cheaper the cost is actually, and the cheaper you can sell them. So it's not per definition that a locally manufactured diagnostic test would be cheaper. Especially not if you compare to high volume producers like in China, India, and the States. So I think that's something we have to realize, that governments and donors also should realize. But on the other hand, I mean, if we are only dependent on these high volume producers, this is not the optimal situation for many countries, right? So I think pool procurement can solve part of that, right? Where you have like pool procurement systems where we pool all the demands from a country or several countries, or even continent-wise, to increase the volumes to be procured to lower price, and have joint negotiations with suppliers locally. So yeah, that's a bit what we also suggest is looking into pool procurement and looking into national trust and national demand creation. So yeah, well, it's a very important question, because at the end, many programs look to the price first, right? But that should also perhaps change and look to what's locally available with a quality assured label is equally important than the price.
Maybe, Stijn, you can break down for us. I know some of these might be pretty obvious, but just to make it easier for us to understand. So the price is not always going to be cheaper. So what are all the advantages of local production? Because someone who doesn't understand or is not familiar with the process may then ask, so why? If it's not cheaper, why would we do that? And there are many reasons to do it. Can you just outline those for us?
Yeah, sure. So it's mainly self-sufficiency, and to make sure you're not dependent on big suppliers. And this is especially the case for local epidemiology diseases. That's why we always say, also in the brief, in the MSF brief, look into the epidemiological context, where for some diseases, right, we have suppliers in the States or in Europe but they can drop the production of the tests from today to tomorrow, for instance. We have a case for the Leishmania test. Abo decided, okay, we stop that production next year, and there is no alternative. There is no local production, right? Because the low volumes and the fragile market for this particular test. So that's a high risk of being dependent on big suppliers, on a handful of big suppliers, right? This is just one example. So I think the self-sufficiency and being able to manufacture the tests which are critical for local diseases is as important as getting the lowest price, I think.
Thank you very much for outlining that, Stein. I just want to check, it looks to me as if Claudina Lewitz is here. Claudina, are you here? There looks like a picture with her name, but I am not sure if she is here. She is here. So Claudina Lewitz from South Africa's Department for Science and Innovation has joined us. She's just joined us from a parliamentary meeting, emergency meeting on the new variant that was announced in South Africa yesterday. Thank you very much for joining us, Claudina. And I would like to ask you a question that relates to what we've been discussing up until now about how does the South African government, your Department of Science and Innovation, how do they support local companies, for instance, like CapeBio, that we've heard from just now, in supplying public institutions here, as well as other regional supply on the continent? How do you support companies to be able to do that when it comes to diagnostic tools?
Yes, sorry for being late, but yeah, I think we've got a bit of since there's actually at the moment a world meltdown. Yeah, there's a number of issues that we need to address. I think Daniel will be one of the first ones to actually sort of be telling you what we've been able to do. When we realized in the beginning of the COVID epidemic, when we were actually struggling to get the necessary agents to do the PCR tests, that is when we then launched a call for immediately for the development, and CapeBio and Daniel were out of the blocks immediately to start looking at what we can do and how we can do it. The big companies, diagnostic companies, caught up after that, but we've proven that we do have the ability. So we've also funded the development of the rapid antigen tests, and I know that there's a number of them actually at SAPRA now for approval. So it might be slow, it's a year later, but we showed that we've got the scientists, because it was developed from scratch. We've got the scientists who can do it, but we also got the companies who can actually do the manufacturing and then take it from there. The problem is these small companies are up against the big pharma companies. And if we do not put measures into place for that emphasize the importance of local production, they're going to be wiped off the face. So sort of just saying, fine, it's interesting. Yes, can we take over your scientists? And that is unfortunately what we have to protect against as well. So it is a bit of an uphill battle, but it is something that between us and Department of Trade and Industry and Competition that we actually take very serious, and to see that we can take it further. We've now proven we can do it. We've got the approved diagnostics. Now the next steps is actually the fight on how to get it into the systems. And we are also discussing as part of the wider African environment on how you then can make these available also within the rest of Africa and within the African free trade agreements and issues around that. But yes, it is the science is proven, but now the uphill starts, but is starting. Thank you.
Claudina, thank you. So if you look at your experience with this and you had to give advice to other African governments who would like to follow the same process, what would those lessons that you've learned and pieces of advice be to other governments?
The first thing is what we could issue those calls because we knew what scientists and what equipment those scientists have available to develop that kind of work. When it was necessary, I think in the case of Daniel, we actually had to assist him to purchase more equipment to actually do the necessary work. And we actually, I know at the stage we were actually running around Daniel to get the necessary hoods that they need to do some of the work in. But the main thing is know your scientists, know what they've got. And then the main thing was, it was to get where CapeBio, for example, was it was the CSIR, it was the Medical Research Council, it was University of Witwatersrand, all assisting and see how we can actually collectively start building the thing. And I think that is the thing that is help the whole issue around health innovation in South Africa is we look at how we can build on one another's strengths and then collectively actually assist a company to get to a product. And I think that is what, if you don't do it together, you will struggle in Africa.
Thanks very much for sharing that advice, Claudina. We're now going to move on to your comments and your questions, and then I will pose them to the panelists. And I see we have in the audience Saberi Murray, who is from the University of Cape Town, and they involved in setting up a platform aiming to assist academic institutes in South Africa to commercialize innovations and also to assist with technology transfers to local companies. So Saberi, I wondered, do you have a quick comment about how the platform you are setting up aims to support diagnostics, manufacturing and supply in Africa? Saberi, are you there? It looks like we may have lost it. She is there, she tells us on the chat box, but she unfortunately has a problem with sound right now. So we're going to wait until that's sorted out, Saberi, and move on to one other participant here, Henry Shen, who is a program manager at the Chines Corporation BGI and leading the BGI production facility in Ethiopia. So Henry, do you have feedback about your diagnostics manufacturing work in Ethiopia? And could you also tell us a little bit more about BGI for those of us who are not familiar with it? Henry, are you there? I see you on the list. Are you able to connect to us and to speak? It looks like he may have a connection problem too. I see Saberi for our technical team says, looks like we cannot enable our mics. So there is a sound problem on that side. Henry, is that you? Okay, let's move on to our questions from participants while our other two participants sort out their sound problems. And we have a question from Erwin in the Q&A box, and he is asking, is COVID-19 diagnostics easily available in Africa? And I think we have touched on that a little bit, but perhaps we can break it down again. You know, if you could perhaps comment on that as the Africa CDC, how easy is it to get your hands on this in Africa?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mia. So initially, during the first phase of the pandemic, like, you know, the first 6 months or so, I think that it has been really, you know, a daunting task to get diagnostics into Africa. For example, I can give you an example. For GeneXpert, for example, which is almost, you know, a near point of care test for COVID testing, TB and HIV. In Africa, there are more than 21,000 GeneXpert modules. And we calculated that one, which means that Africa can do more than 11 million tests in 1 year using that platform, even without affecting HIV test. However, we used only 5% of that potential because the cartridges were not available. And African market has not been prioritized. So later, I think many companies came in, especially the automated high throughput testing companies came in, and I think it was a little bit solved. So today we have availability is not a problem today in terms of diagnostics, because we have it here in the continent, including antigen and PCR kits, and we do have also many companies now that are doing high throughput manufacturing. So availability is not a problem. The problem now in Africa is the uptake of diagnostics because of these bureaucratic processes in the approval, and not giving due attention also to locally manufactured diagnostics, and also slow introduction of antigen testing. I think that's the only problem today. So diagnostics are available and they are becoming even cheaper. So antigen test is now $2 per test, 2.5, and PCR tests, the cost has gone down. So it's now, Africa should strengthen our regulatory processes so that we increase the uptake of diagnostics. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. There is a follow-up question to that asking, is there any gaps in diagnostics? Are there specific areas where there's no diagnostics? And also when it comes to producing these locally, companies need to make a profit, local companies. And is that possible right now? Are there proper structures and manufacturing processes in place to make that happen? Claudina, perhaps you can comment on that, and then also you, Stein, from the perspective of dealing with many countries in Africa.
For example, if I can mention one company in Cape Town, Medical Diagnostic, they have actually been able to produce laminar flow diagnostics for various diseases at very competitive costs. So yes, we can do it. And it is that willingness to actually enter the market and not to be scared. But the commitment to, especially where it's a centralized process of procurement, that needs to be committed to assist Africa first. And I think that will open the abilities. But yes, we can make it a competitive process. We've proven it.
Thank you, Claudina. Stein, just before we move on to you, I'm going to move on to you, but I just want to ask Daniel and Sheikh, their companies, do you make a profit? Is it sustainable what you're doing? Let's start with you, Daniel.
Yes, we are a private company with private investors. So obviously we have to make profit, but I have to say that, I heard what Sting was saying about, the capacity in terms of manufacturing. That is not an issue for us, not at all. As small as we are able to produce at the same scale as the big players. Secondly, we are 40 to 60% cheaper compared to the cheapest import that gets into South Africa. That we have analyzed properly. And what this can do, basically, it can allow testing costs to be reduced because the product that is available locally is cheaper. So there's no reason for us to maintain the high prices that are currently being charged by the private and public sectors, in other spaces. So, we make profits, but we're not really making exorbitant profits as compared to multinationals that are bringing the product in the country. And yet we have the same capabilities and we are cheaper, way cheaper. And we have quick turnarounds, about 3 days maximum, post placing an order. So this is a different game change for us. And I think, we're trying to replicate this throughout Africa through working with partners. And by the way, just to close, we have a company in Canada. It's a big company, but we are under the contract not to disclose who they are. They took the reagents, the components that we are using in our kit. They made their own COVID test kit. It's FDA registered. And it's, again, more expensive than our product because it's now coming into South Africa. So really, the quality doesn't really matter for us. In fact, it's not really an issue for us because we are able to deliver the same results at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Just a quick question. So the fact that your tests are cheaper, has that translated into the public paying cheaper prices for tests?
I think I'll leave that to Claudina. But being a local manufacturer comes with a lot of benefits, right? And also being an African manufacturer comes with a lot of advantages, right? We can drive through to Zambia, to Angola, like we are now in Angola, and actually be able to distribute these products very easily. And again, again, the regulator doesn't allow us to be able to market our product the way we normally market other products in terms of saying, this is R9.99. We can't do that. We have to provide official codes to the customers. But we probably are going to engage them so that we can make it seen throughout the content that our products are cheaper, and also put the data in comparison with the products that are being imported so that it becomes clear. I think the restriction on marketing does not allow us to be able to publish the pricing of these IVD products.
Thank you, Daniel. So, Claudina, why are we not paying cheaper prices? I understand that Daniel can't promote his product in a certain way, but why? Why are we as the public, if there's cheaper tests, why does it not translate into cheaper cost for the public?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question. It is something we are querying as well. And yeah, I prefer not to take it further at this stage. But yes, it is of concern. And it has to do also with the stranglehold that big pharmas and big diagnostic companies has got on your people that's actually using the products. So.
Clearly a very complex issue, and I'm sure I see Stein is nodding a lot and would probably want to comment on that. But just before that, Sech, what does it look on your side in Senegal? How is it playing out? Are you making a profit, and how does the process work on your side?
Yeah, thank you, Mia. So first, I would like to clarify that Diatropics is not a standard company. It's a really social venture with an innovative financial model where the membership fees, the members will support the operations. Meaning, actually, today MSF is supporting us for the meningitis and measles RDTs, manufacturing and development. This means that these members will pay the salaries, the operations, the equipment maintenance, and that allows Diatropics to sell the test at cost of goods, but plus a small margin, which is around 5%. So we need that margin just because the logistics fees can be very difficult to predict. This margin will help us not lose money. And so we need that margin because that margin will help us, can be re-injected into the operations to do R&D and to address other key diseases like dengue or yellow fever, etc. So yes, we make a margin, but it's very tiny. Our business model is really to sell the test at cost of goods.
Thank you, Sech. Stein, what are your comments here as an activist and working for an organization that looks at so many countries over Africa? What are your insights?
Yeah, sure. So it's an important question. Eh? If you manufacture locally, right? Of course, it should be also profitable, and you have to survive as a company. And that's not an easy question, right? Because especially if you look to the NTD, so the neglected tropical diseases, if you tackle that front, I mean, we know the volumes are small, and we know the market is often fragile. And that's why, for instance, the non-profit business models or public entities are a good match for these. Like, and I acknowledge what Chair said, like Diatropics has a non-profit model where profit is not the main driver, but meeting the local public health needs. So I think, yeah, we should consider that more as an option next to for-profit models. And for this type of diseases, for local manufacture of, for instance, low volume local diseases like leishmania or other neglected tropical disease, we may consider also financial support, but also consider a diverse portfolio. But the key point we want to make as MSF is also more transparency, right? If we know the volumes, if we know the cost of production, I mean, that should be the start of pricing negotiations, right? And not what the market can bear. So that's in a nutshell what I wanted to add to the discussion in terms of sustainability and surviving as a local manufacturers. Thank you, Mia.
Thanks, Stijn. And on that note, it looks like we have Saberi Marais and Henry Shen back. They got their sound back and are ready to make some comments. So just to remind you about, we're going to start with Saberi, and what he does is he's from the University of Cape Town and is involved in setting up a platform that aims to assist academic institutes in South Africa to commercialize innovations and assist with the technology transfers to local companies. So Saberi, do you have a quick comment about the platform you are setting up and how it aims to support diagnostics manufacturing and supply on the continent? Over to you.
Hi, Mia. Thank you very much for the introduction and the introduction to speak. We haven't set up the platform just yet. We are in the ideation phase effectively, and we are getting input from some key stakeholders in the local space. But let me rather speak to the reason why we thought of the need effectively is I think COVID-19, as your guests have highlighted today, has really accelerated the local development of diagnostics and hopefully cheap enough diagnostics that can translate and do tech transfer to the areas and the communities and the users who need them. And universities across South Africa are effectively really working on diagnostics for several other diseases. And what we've identified is, the potential to look at converging some of that intellectual property and the inventions that for diagnostic development that could potentially translate to local companies as well. And effectively that as we're going through the ideation phase for this idea and propose platform, we're looking at the stories of Diatropics and other organizations in India and learning from effectively the establishment. Because one of the things we want to do is facilitate the tech transfer from universities to local businesses as well, beyond COVID, looking at other diagnostics as well and for other diseases. Thank you.
Thanks very much for explaining that and also giving us insight on how the transfer between universities and the local transfer process works there, Saberi. We're now also going to hear from another participant that we couldn't hear previously because of sound issues. That is Henry Shen, who is a program manager at the Chines Corporation, BGI, and leading the BGI production facility in Ethiopia. Henry, do you have feedback about your diagnostics manufacturing work in Ethiopia?
Yes, this is Henry Shen from BGI Health Ethiopia, and finally I can connect to the webinar now. I will introduce a little bit about our project. We have a manufacturing factory in Addis Ababa, which is established in last September. It's our smoothly operated for more than 1 year. Our first product is PCR test kit, and now we are building our.
We've lost Henry there with a sound issue again. I'm going to give it a few seconds just to see if it comes back. If it doesn't. It looks like we've lost Henry, so let's move on to some of the other audience questions. But before we do that, Thank you very much for all the questions you've sent so far. We've got a number of questions. We've got about 15 minutes left of the webinar. If you still have a question, please do enter it in the chat box. And if you wanted to make a comment and if you've got good sound, please raise your hand and we can help you to do that. But we, of course, would need to be able to hear you. So if you have a sound issues, then rather type your comment in the chat box. So, you know, there is a question specifically for you. It is asking, over and above Africa CDC supporting the call for tech transfers to local manufacturers on the continent, is the Africa CDC and also the African Union and their member states still in support of IP waivers on diagnostics and also vaccines and other treatment? The World Trade Organization ministerial meeting in Geneva is going to happen next week, and that issue will be debated there. What is your position on that at the moment, and are there any next steps that you would be taking?
Thank you. I think that's very timely and very important question, Mia. In relation to this vaccine access issue in Africa, we have this big initiative now, the local manufacturing of vaccines and diagnostics. Actually, you know, for diagnostics, we started our advocacy work back in 2018, where, you know, we put this initiative, what we call it, the Africa Collaborative to Advance Diagnostics, is the Africa initiative, which actually is looking into 3 important categories. One is we want to create functional partnerships with the industrial sector all over, and bringing the technology transfer to the Africa. And especially, you know, initially you need to collaborate with big manufacturing institutions so that you can have, you know, your skills transferred and build also some of your manufacturing plants and so on. And then the second objective was we want to really, you know, make sure the regulatory process is facilitated for local manufacturers. Because you see, you know, people, there is a tendency that, you know, people feel that something that's locally manufactured is of like, you know, inferior quality and so on. I think we need to move away from that process. And then the third one is we want to expedite validation process so that, you know, diagnostics can be registered easily and quickly. And then to do that, there is a whole discussion of this, you know, coming up with policy issues on importing and exporting of raw materials, diagnostics, and so on. So I will say, you know, that is a discussion happening now. Nothing has been decided yet. And most likely, you know, it will take up the momentum, especially with the vaccine manufacturing now, which is really, you know, very, very key. So I see, you know, more movements coming on, and Africa Union, I think their policy is clear. I don't know if you know, they have also put this, you know, the African pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa. So this concept has been there for a long time, but it's now, you know, putting this into action, materializing it. That's what's remaining. Otherwise, you know, the higher level of management in the continent, they are clear that we need this local manufacturing of diagnostics, pharmaceuticals, and vaccines. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. You know, there's a question for Claudina that relates a little bit to this because it's also about the TRIPS waiver. Claudina, did South Africa waive some of the usual government taxes and licensing fees that are participant here says stifle local companies from thriving, so that it allows for an enabling environment for local production of COVID medical products? And I'm going to leave it with that question and then move on to the second part of the question. If you could just answer this one first.
There are tax incentives available for the development of the the R&D component of that, and then there are incentives available from Department of Trade and Industry for the actual to enable local manufacturing. So yes, but people need to apply for it and go through the process of actually doing it. So yes, we are trying to get local companies to grow on that. Yeah.
Thank you. Before I move on to the second part of that question, Daniel, did you apply for any of these benefits?
If my recollection is correct, I think we did, and we're still waiting for an answer. We just happen to have a very supportive investor as well, in the form of Alan Cray, philanthropy through East-Squared Investments, where they are looking for high impact businesses. That's why we're not so much profit orientated, but we have an impact element of it. But I do interact with Department of Trade and Industry quite a lot, and they were very instrumental together with DSI through Claudina in terms of helping us to get to where we are. But I believe the delay is very technical, but we will do some follow-ups, and I believe we're supposed to get a feedback around September, but I'll just make a follow-up. These things do happen, and we understand because we have been working with government funds for some time in developing our company. So it's not something that I'm worried about. I think they should come around.
If I may ask, how long ago did you apply?
It was during the development of the product, I think around May, June, somewhere there.
In this year, right?
Yes, in this year.
So thank you, Daniel. So Claudina, how long does it take to get feedback? How long does this process take?
Unfortunately, that is under the Department of Trade and Industry, and I cannot see. But I must say, in the case of Daniel, he actually, to start this whole process, he actually got government funding. So this is just for the actual going forward, but it's within Department of Trade and Industry. And yes, if we are aware, then we do contact Trade and Industry and ask them if they can give us feedback. But yeah, not for us to.
Sure. Thanks, Claudina. To stay with you, the second part of that question that I was asking you earlier is, as the co-lead for the TRIPS waiver, what did the government in South Africa do to ready companies that can manufacture products? For instance, what did you do to ready? You've spoken a little bit about CapeBio, but did you implement other measures for other companies?
It is. Then I need to go beyond diagnostics. So then we need to start looking at the vaccines and actually the efforts around that, and what we are doing with regard to the agreement that BioVac has got to do the formulation, full and finishing of the COVID vaccine, BioNTech Pfizer COVID vaccine, as well as the whole mRNA vaccine hub that is being created. And that was only announced in June. And they've already made the first mRNA vaccine construct that is very much the same as what is available in the market at the moment. So, and that is mostly funded through efforts from South African government, but also with German and French government as well.
Thank you, Claudina. I'm going to move on to Daniel and Sech, because there is a specific question for them about the way in which they operate. And the question is, would CapeBio ever consider becoming a social venture, or Diatropics go wholly private? And why or why not would you do this or not do it? Let's start with you, Sech, and then we go to Daniel.
Okay, thank you, Mia. I think Diatropics is a social venture and will remain a social venture. Actually, so we are having discussions internally and also with partners whether we should address some disease that will be maybe more profitable to Diatropics. And if we plan to do so, I don't think it will be done with a separate company, but not with Diatropics. But because the issue is, once we start once we are a private company dealing with profit, that we'll start compromising. We believe we'll start compromising on access. And this is something we don't want to do. So yeah, if you have to do it, that will be a separate company.
Thank you, Sheikh. Makes a lot of sense. Daniel, would you ever change to social venture?
You know, in a way, you know, we are a high impact company because, you know, our understanding is this, that at the center of life is biotechnology. And if you look at all industries, they are interconnected, right? If your biotechnology outputs are poorer, your living standards will be very expensive. Your food will be expensive. Your medication or healthcare will be expensive. Your energy and resources, and management will be expensive. Knowledge generation will be expensive. So what we are doing basically is to look at how our company can play a critical role in reducing the cost of living in general. Your medical aid, bills, they are high. Why? Because some of the inputs into that are the testing. You know, when the doctor sends samples to laboratories to check what you have, they require those reagents. So we understand this mandate very well. That is why at the center of our innovation, we make sure that we develop quality products that are affordable to ensure that we improve quality of life and we reduce the cost of living, because our picture is not about making profits now, but we're looking at a long-term picture to say how to improve quality of life and ensure that it is affordable throughout the continent. In that way, I think we are playing some form of a role, without necessarily being non-profit. Like I said earlier on, our investor is an high-impact investor, and they're patient investors. They don't really, pushing us to make as much profit as needs to be, as long as we are able to survive and grow the business so that we can grow the impact. So in a way, we do both, but we understand the mandate in full image.
Thank you, Daniel. We have about 5 minutes left of this webinar, and I'd like to use it to give each panelist a chance to share the one, if a company in South Africa, it relates to a question that someone asked here, if a company wants to start with manufacturing local diagnostics, what is the one big piece of advice that you will give them, or a lesson that you can share that you've learned in the way that you work? So I'm going to start with Stein. As a advocacy organization, what would your one piece of advice be to local companies?
Thank you, Mia. So my key recommendation would be to really look into the local context. What is needed in the country, in the region, as a diagnostics test for which diseases, to really look into the local context for game-changing technologies that can also then promote demand creation. So that would be my key recommendation, of course, out of many others like transparency and others. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Stein. Let's move on to you.
Yeah, Mayor, what I would like to advise him will be, the investment return will not be immediate. I think it's important that they have, futuristic view, long term, and then they also, expect, there are still some barriers, because generally there is the assumption by the committee that, if it's locally manufactured, then they think it's not of good quality. So I think they need to be prepared, to face those challenges. And then I will advise them to do this initially in partnership with well-experienced companies, so that their business model can sustain. Thank you.
Thanks, Yenu. Glodina, from the South African Department of Science and Innovation, what would your piece of advice be?
Sorry. Yes, I think look at the local context and do your due diligence very properly beforehand and before you venture in, because it's expensive business. It is not so, and have the backing from your government. Yes, so that is why we are engaging with companies to see how we can assist them then what is needed to take it forward. And it's interesting, we are actually now embarking on, specifically for diagnostics and medical devices, on a health economy master plan, where we're talking with the industry from DTI, health and DSI perspective on what is needed in order to grow the industry. And I think that will, once that is done, that will greatly enhance the efforts from the government and help the companies.
Thanks, Claudina. Stech, from your side, as an organization or a company, social venture that is involved in this, what's the one big piece of advice?
I think that will be to clearly differentiate need and demand, because they are not the same. They need to understand what is the need, what's the demand, and also be able to know exactly where the demand is. And once they know where it is, to kindly control the distributors, because they tend to add a margin, which is compromising access. I'm telling this because this is something we are dealing with. And so, yeah, that will be that.
Thanks, Sech. Daniel, we're going to end with you, with your big lesson or piece of advice.
Yeah, for me, is understanding the value chain, right? Because you cannot play every role in that value chain. Put yourself where you know that you have strength and you've got support, and also work with partners. Example, we can provide our reagents in an OEM based, and when you can help the local manufacturer to set up their own manufacturing and assembling, and that is part of the value chain. So identify your strength within the value chain and work with the company downstream, and also work with others upstream, so that you are able to really maximize your efforts. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Daniel. And that brings us to the end of this webinar, and also this webinar series that consisted of 3 webinars. Today was the last in that series about local production in Africa. I would like to thank all the panelists for their time and for sharing their expertise and making the time for that. We've really learned a lot from you. I'd also like to thank the team of MSF Southern Africa who organized these webinars. Thank you very much for your work in that regard. And if you would like to get a recording of today's webinar or any of the previous 2 webinars, you can get in touch with our MSF team, and you can then also get a recording on the previous 2 webinars, was on vaccine and on treatment. And I don't have an address right here in front of me to get in touch with them, but I'm going to ask the team to please put it in the chat box of Zoom, so that if someone does want to get in touch, they can do that to ask for recordings. That is the end of me also interacting with you today. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for all your questions. I hope you've learned as much as I have, and I hope you have a very good Friday. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey.
I think we'll just give people a few more minutes to hop off.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Ntokozo and Candice.